Okay, so let's continue where we left off yesterday. Screen. So what we were talking about yesterday is that there are going to be instances where if I was doing a normative practice on my property and my neighbor wants to get closer to my property line, he cannot prevent me from doing certain practices that I've been doing already I've established precedent. However, bamedvar mamurim b'sha'ar nezikim, but that's true with other forms of damage. Aval nezek ashan reach beisakise avak v'chayotze bo. He says, but that's only true with other types of damage. But when it comes to smoke, stench from an outhouse, or things that kick up dust, he says, and those kinds of things, ein lamazik shelo hirchik chazaka. There's no such thing as a chazaka, having an established pattern. Okay, afilu im hanizik shasa kamashanim, even if the neighbor was silent for many years. And the reason he could have been silent is because he wasn't using that part of his property. Mishum dekevin she'ein hanizak sovlan, ve'ha'ezek kavuach eskaso she'eino mocha. Because we have to assume that these forms of a nuisance are not something that a person would be moichel on, just that he tolerates them temporarily because he doesn't need that part of his property. Va'afilu im mitechila asa hamasik b'haskamas hanizak, yachol hanizak lomer lo desavar hayeshayachol lekabel v'achshav en yachol lekabel. And even if the offensive neighbor asked permission initially from his neighbor, is it okay if I set up this operation right over here? And even if the neighbor said it's okay, he's later allowed to change his mind with the argument that I thought it would be tolerable, and I realize it's really not. Any other source of damage where Beis would estimate that most people would not be able to tolerate, it could also be that there are certain instances where the Beis will intervene when they know that the neighbor has a certain sensitivity, and therefore they could step in and say it's not something that he would have been moichel. Gam b'sha'ar nezikin shechazaka mo'ila bahem, b'medvar mamurim kishehechzik bizman shehizik l'shcheno, v'im hechazik kodem sheyeh l'shcheno nezek mimaisa v'lo michabo, afal pi sheyachol la'akev biyado, ein hadin bazeh muskam. He says it's even in a situation where it's a minor form of annoyance, and where the mazik started his activity without any protests from the neighbor. When there's no protest, some say that as long as he's established a pattern of activity, the neighbor cannot later protest. That's not agreed to upon by all. And then he goes on and he says, he goes through this paragraph. We'll skip this paragraph. Biram b'chol hanal im yesh edim lamachzik shahanizik mochar lo b'kinyan ma'os shaharezech nechshav kekarka o b'kinyan suder v'esamo zakal alav b'milva esashimush hanal lamrod sheyada shemaziko. He says, all of this notwithstanding, in a situation where there was an actual kinyan, where the neighbor purchases the rights of usage of an offensive activity near his neighbor, and there are witnesses to this, or there's a contract, or this right was awarded to him, or he was moichel to him as in a gift, and they made a kinyan. Harei hamachzik zacha bazeh. So then the neighbor who now is claiming that it's bothering him has abdicated his rights. V'yesh omrim de mechila kodem shiyeh hezek lanizik mo'ila below kinyan Af lahasovrim de chazaka ba'alma eina mo'ila lo, v'rak mechila la'achar sheyesh hezek l'nizek eina mo'ila below kinyan. Some say that even a verbal mechila before the activity has started is acceptable. But once the damage has started, the activity has started, then you need an actual kinyan in order for it to be legally binding. Okay. Next, ein chazaka behezek re'iyah. There is no chazaka that can be established when it comes to visual damage, which means that if a person has a view of his neighbor's property, even though he's had that view for many years, no neighbor has a right to say, well, it's my right to look into your property. So we'll go into these halachas later. Let's go to the second chapter. Dine harchakas nazikin bein shchenim bekama dvarim mitzuyim. So let's talk about common cases. Now that we have the general rules in place, let's talk about common situations where there's an obligation for a neighbor to distance himself from his neighbor. Tzineret mayim shel koma elyona shenitkalkala benase hezek etzel bal dira hatachtona al mila takin et tatzineret uminose betashlume hanezek. So when you have a pipe that of a higher floor in the building that is broken, and as a result, it's a burst pipe, let's say, or it's a leaky pipe, and it's causing damage to one of the residents in a lower floor, who has the obligation to fix the pipe and who has to pay for the damages? Okay. What? Yes, we have. Yes, we have. Shnayim hadorim, echad bekoma elyona ve'echad bekoma tachtona. V'nitkalkalat tzineret mayim shel koma elyona. Two people live in an apartment building, or in a duplex. One's in the upper floor, one's in the lower floor. And the pipe breaks. V'habayim haboyim eilehem b'tzineret mazikin lekoma hatachtona in b'siyu tikrota o b'nechasim sheba lemata v'chulei. So the leaky pipe is damaging the ceiling, or it's damaging property that is on the lower floor. Tzaracha elyon l'takin et tatzineret. So a person on the upper floor has to fix the pipe. Ach im lo tikein v'huzak hatachton. If, however, he neglects to fix it, and the person on the lower floor is damaged or it sustains damage as a result, ein ha'elyon chayav l'shalem ha'nezikim she'iru l'tachton mechoser tikuno lamrot sheyada mikilkul hatzinor. The upper neighbor is not obligated to pay for the damage that was caused by the water, even when he knows that the pipe is leaking. Now, why should that be? Probably because it's the responsibility of the lower neighbor to detect the flow of water, just as it is of the upper neighbor.
But at that point, the damage is done.
It could be at that point the damage is done. So let's see, he's probably going to qualify this. The chol zeh keshehezek hatachton bal yedei hamayim aboyim me aleihem. The aforementioned is only when the water damage is caused by itself. In other words, it's just through the natural flow of water. Avolim hezek hatachton bal yedei shehaelyon patach berez hamayim l'shimushav. But if it's a result of the upper neighbor turning on the faucet, in other words, the leak only occurs when the upper neighbor uses the water in his house. Or let's say, right. So let's say, it's a drain pipe. Yeah, empties the bath, flushes the toilet, or things like that. Okay. Lamrot sheyodea shahamayim shemoshe cholchem achar kach yeshirot el hatachton. Says, knowing that this water is going to flow down to his lower neighbor, okay. Uva'ofen shekasher hezek nase etzel hatachton adayin lo kalu hamayim shenaflu milamayla v'nivlu b'ma'azevat hagag. And the situation being that the damage that is caused to the lower floor, the water is still flowing from upstairs. You see, the whole basis for my not being liable for damage to the stuff on to your ceiling and the stuff in your apartment is because I'm not actively causing damage. It's happening on its own. So therefore, I can get away with not having to pay because it's a leak that happened on its own. But if it's happening as a result of my action, of my flushing or my draining and things like that, so then it's a direct causative, it's a direct damage, not a causative damage. And therefore, I could be held liable for the damage that causes. ורק בנזיקים שאירו לפני שיודע מחילקול הצינור או בזמן שעדיין לא היה ביכולתו לתקן הצנרת, אין לחייבו. It's only, let's say, if I didn't know about the damage, or if I'm not able to fix the pipe, so then I'm not going to be liable. Mishum shehu kemamono shehizik ba'ones depater. Because in a situation where my property damages completely by accident, so then I'm putter. I'm putter from damages under certain limited situations. When I damage by accident, I have to pay under all circumstances. When my property damages by accident, there was no negligence involved, so then under certain conditions, I'm going to be putter. Okay.
But you're not going to know that until you actually find the repair, and there's going to be damage done to go and find that repair. I mean, you maybe have to go through the ceiling of the person's area. So how much of that are you responsible for if it's not a pipe that is waste, that's a supply pipe? I mean, and who takes responsibility for that? You ask the guy.
It's my responsibility if the pipe is my pipe. If the pipe services my apartment, I have to fix it.
Right.
But I don't have to pay for damage that was caused through a complete lack of knowledge. Say that the leak could have been there for weeks and it was a slow damage that was being caused to your ceiling, right? So that I don't have to pay for if I had no way of knowing about it. That's the point that he's making. Kivisa notefet mayim mikoma elyona al kivisa yevesha tachteha. Okay. The laundry, the laundry machine, I guess, from the higher floor is leaking onto the washing machine on the lower floor. Hadar bekoma elyona tzarich lizoher shelo. Oh, sorry, not the washing machine. This is when you hang up your laundry on the mirpeset, and the water from your laundry is dripping. The drip dry is leaking onto the dry laundry on the lower floor. Okay. Hadar.
It's got a
What?
second wash. There's no damage there.
Well,
it could be dye coming down the water. Yeah.
Either that or it could be I was planning on wearing that clothing today and now you've prevented me. Hador bekoma elyona tzarich lizoher shelo litlos kavisa hanotefet mayim al kavisa shel bali koma tachtona im kvar yavsha. You have to be careful, at least certainly not lechatchila, to hang up your dripping laundry when you know it's going to drip down on dry laundry that's on the lower floor. V'lachenim ha'elyon chafetz shelo liyitztarich lizaher bazeh alav l'taken ganon mitachat likvisato limnoa hartavat kvisat hatachton. And therefore, if the upper floor wants not to have to worry about that, he should alav l'taken gagon. Let him put some kind. Now, a gagon probably is some kind of little. Yeah, I don't know.
Like an awning.
Is it an awning? Maybe an awning. Here, let's see. Gagon.
It's a small roof.
A small roof. Is that what you said?
Yeah, a small roof or small canopy hanging over.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I guess it's overhanging the floor of my mirpeset, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Next, Ilan hanota lechatzar chavero. When there's a tree that overhangs into my neighbor's property. Ilan shel Shimon hanota lechatzar shel Ruvain. Ein Ruvain yachol lachav et Shimon bal ha'ilan likzotet nofo. If there's a tree that overhangs from Shimon's property into Ruvain's property, Ruvain cannot coerce Shimon to cut the branches. Avol yachol Ruvain likzot et hanov kishu yisa behotzaot peulat haktzitza. But Ruvain can cut the branches himself and pay for the costs of the arborist. Ve'enot tzarech l'shalim shum damim l'Shimon. And he doesn't have to pay Shimon any money for trimming back his tree, meaning like Ruvain says, hey, that tree shouldn't have been trimmed. It's going to get sick, or it's going to not get enough nutrients. Sorry, whatever's jutting into my property, I have a right to trim back. Biram, ein Ruvain yachol liktzotz elamasha mafrialo, kigon b'bechinat avir ve'ora velo yoter. However, Ruvain can only trim back what is bothering him about the tree, either from shade or air flow and things like that. He cannot trim back more. Shekenit kinu chazal ubein beilan perot ubein beilan srak. What's that?
And to his property.
Only to his property line, and even on his property, he cannot trim back more than what is necessary. So, and our sages made that accommodation because they know that trees tend to grow from one neighbor to another. And this is true whether it's a fruit tree or whether it's a non-fruit tree. Bamed dvarim amurim be'ilan shebizman netiyato lo hizik l'Reuven. And this is only granted that Reuven has limited rights of trimming the tree when the tree was planted in such a way that it was not causing direct damage to Reuven. Aval im bishat netiyato hizik l'Reuven. But even if from the time of the tree's planting, it was a nuisance to Reuven, afilu hiziko rak ba'afela, even if its damage was only by creating too much shade, wrote Salomar, afilu below shenichnasa ilan latoch reshut Reuven ela she'amad neged chalono. That is to say, even if the tree is not protruding into Shimon's property, but it is blocking Shimon's view from his house, Arei al Shimon limnoa hezeko v'liktzotz ha'ilan. Then Shimon has an obligation to cut down the tree. Re'ei lahalan perek zayin halacha vav, and we'll talk more about that later. Okay. So the distinction that's being made over here is a tree that is slow growing and just has branches slowly protruding into Reuven's property. There, Reuven cannot charge Shimon, cannot force Shimon to pay for the trimming of the tree, but he has every right to trim it back himself. When the tree from its very inception was a nuisance, because the very moment that it was planted, it was meant to cover over Reuven's window and obstruct his view that he has a right to, not a view that's going to, let's say, obstruct Reuven's view into Shimon's property, but just Reuven's view in general. Let's say like he's planting a tree in front of Reuven's ocean view, okay, or lake view. So that's something that Reuven can say that's not acceptable, and Shimon, you have to remove the tree, period. Okay.
Excessive shade would come under that.
Excessive shade would come under that as well. Yeah. But if it's just excessive shade, but it's something that can be trimmed back, so then Reuven has to pay for that.
Oh.
Yeah, Reuven has to pay for the trimming back of the tree, because if it's just something that periodically protrudes into my property and creates a nuisance of shade or airflow, then I have to take care of that. If it was planted with the, I guess, at the time that it was planted, it was not an obstructive tree, and only after time, then Reuven has the right to trim it back, but he cannot charge Shimon. If, however, from the very moment that it was planted, it was a problem, so then Reuven can coerce Shimon to uproot it. Okay, next, Ilan Hanotel Rishus Harabim. If a tree is protruding onto public property, Ilan she'anaf of notim l'rishus harabim, yicholin b'nei rishus harabim liktzos me'anafim shiur kedei shelo yafriya la'ovrim rishus harabim im masoy. He says, if there's a tree that's protruding into a public thoroughfare, like quite often, I'll be walking down Clark, and there'll be branches from a person's tree where you have to duck, and
Willow tree.
and stuff like that. So what is my right as a public citizen walking on a public sidewalk? So I have a right to trim back that tree. Anyone in the public has a right to trim back that tree. B'chovas haketzitza yesha kasvu shemutelasi al bala ilan umemela hu yisa gamken behotzat haketzitza. There are some poskim who say that it is the cost of the trimming back of the tree has to be borne by the owner of the tree. In that situation, that's what some poskim say. V'lichora yesh la'ayin bazeh, diyesh lomar de b'nei reshut harabim v'ainu ha'iriyah, heim sheyisu b'pu'ula k'tzitza v'hotzat ha'kruchim ba. There's an argument to be made that it's the public who has to bear the expense, which would mean the local municipality would have to bear the price. You'd go to Gila Marto or whatever and tell her, hey, this tree is a nuisance. What can you do about it? And she'll send an arborist over.
Dear Stephen.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not going to bother the mayor for something like this.
Well, no, really, if somebody gets hit with the branch or with the fruit of the tree that falls into the ground, if somebody sleeps, it's any liability from the owner of the tree.
Yeah, potentially that's a liability for the owner of the tree if his property is causing fruit or berries to fall down from the and people slip and fall. Yeah.
So that was usually because there are berries that can actually stay in things, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a tree on your neighbor's side and the berries are falling on your side and they're staining your pavement, right,
On the deck.
or the deck or whatever,
Yeah. So you can trim back the tree.
right?
Yeah.
But you can't charge them for cleaning up the stain.
I don't believe so, unless I'm not sure. There may be mitigating circumstances. What would the argument be? That I had no idea that this was going to happen. I mean, if it happens on a regular basis, and you know that these berries stain, so then you should have taken precautions before, trim it back before it does it. Yeah, that's what I would say if my neighbor came to me
If you knew
with that
before it was
complaint.
the first instance,
Yeah.
you just bought the house
Yeah,
or the tree hadn't been as flowing in the property as it had,
yeah,
yeah.
right. Okay. Next, Ishtana Bitzad Kotel Chavero. Urinating against your friend's dividing wall. Okay.
Speak to Rabbi Black about that.
Marking territory.
Well, we're in the.
Okay, Lo Yashtin Adam Bitzad Kotel Shel Chavero, B'Kitalim Shalanu Shehem Me'avonim. You're not allowed to urinate on the side of your friend's wall. In other words, this is just referring to, let's say you got to go pee, right? And you can't urinate against your friend's wall if it's made out of stone or concrete. Ela im yarchik tefach meha kotel, unless you distance yourself 1 tefach from the wall, because I guess you could potentially damage the wall.
Splashback.
And that makes no difference whether you're peeing in a public area or whether you're peeing on your own property. You still can't pee against your friend's wall. If you want to create a latrine, like an outhouse, you have to distance it 3 tvachim from your friend's wall. The argument being is that the uric acid could actually cause damage to the wall.
What about to the grass?
Well, if it's my grass, then it's no problem. But the point being is that it could actually damage the wall. And certainly the stench is going to be an issue also.
And I imagine that would also go to where make it more applicable is people who walk their dog.
Yes, there's applications for your dogs, right? But dogs pee against the walls all the time. But so this could be a very practical halacha that
Pick up the dog and move it. Good luck. I ain't doing that.
well, you don't have to pick the dog up, just pull it with a leash.
Right.
Yeah, but no, but just have your dog urinate against a tree instead of against a wall. Okay. Hezek reach, damage, odor damage. Asr la'adam lasos beveso davar hamefitz reach ra hamagia l'rishus shchena. A person is not allowed to perform an activity in his home which will cause an offensive odor that will travel into your neighbor's property. It doesn't make a difference whether it's the offensive odor of an outhouse or whether it's some other offensive odor. Anything that creates an offensive odor to the average person is something that a neighbor can prevent the other neighbor from causing. This is true, even if there's sufficient public area distance between the two neighbors. But if the odor travels, I can still stop you. What would be an example of
This
that?
happens a lot in apartment buildings where they're cooking this curry or something and it goes out into the hall and it stinks, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a practical thing that happens in a building.
Why do you say that this is offensive? This is not offensive. This is from my country.
My neighbor's excellent.
Yeah.
Much cannabis composite they've seen.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
You're right.
I wonder if there's a law that says that if a person, I mean, cannabis is legal,
Yeah,
right?
you can, in your own.
Medical license, you get the right to smoke it.
No, anyone can smoke it today.
Your own premises,
Yeah,
you can,
we have a no smoking thing in our thing, but if you have a license.
Oh, okay.
For medicinal.
well, you're in a building.
Cannabis, where they use gummies, it doesn't smell, but it's still, you're allowed to do.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if, to Errol's point, can I, if I'm a homeowner
Let it join up in your backyard.
and the guy next door to me is perpetually smoking pot, and it's really creating a nuisance, do I have a legal argument to be made?
Yeah.
What is it like? But he's saying he's performing a legal activity on his property.
It doesn't matter if you do construction at 2 in the morning in your house, and that's legal too. You're still not allowed to distribute.
Well, I'm saying there's a noise ordinance. That's for that.
That's for the
But
ordinance.
is there a smell ordinance?
Yeah, so the common law of nuisance is basically any activity that unreasonably interferes with the use and enjoyment of your land. So that a lot of the stuff in halakha is very close. It basically has to be unreasonable activity from both sides. And it also has to be of some significance and consequence. You don't have to be like dainty or something like that to be effect. You have to be more than just, I'll put up with it, whatever. It has to be something that really bothers you. And it's reasonable, like objectively, would it bother like a reasonable person or something?
Well, like in Ron's example, a reasonable person doesn't like the smell of these Asian foods.
If you ask the people our kids' age, does that bother you? And the smell of cannabis or something, they probably say, it doesn't bother me.
Yeah, everyone's used to it.
Right, but us, our age, we whatever. I hate the smell. It makes me also.
Get you some big fans.
So which reasonable people, like.
Okay, all right, so we gave you some homework, Marv. Okay, have a great day, everybody.
Go ahead.